to May 2014.
And, okay, and this is for where we got answers.
And this is for the
The
276
voluntary survey. Okay.
answers to the voluntary survey, which did cover, 2/3 of the state's population, and we think is fairly representative. So what you can see here is in the South Coast, water use May to May is up. And again, that doesn't include San Diego County data. And we know anecdotally that San Diego County was up about 10%. On the other hand, you can see that some of the other results we reported back in June actually look better. The Sacramento region savings is actually higher. The Bay Area is doing slightly better than we had reported in June. And you can see there are a couple other areas, Central Coast, North Coast, that are doing fairly well. Tulare Lake is not doing particularly well. So again, this is comparing to 2011 through 2013. Anecdotally, we've heard that if we were just able to compare 2013 to 2014, these numbers would look slightly better. That taking out that 2011 and 2012 data would make it look better. So that's one thing to keep in mind.
Okay.
Next slide. So I'm going to walk you through the proposed regulations. And I want to stress that these proposed prohibitions listed on this slide, they would be temporary, as with the rest of the emergency regulations. They are, in effect, 270 days with a possibility for extension, but that's how it works.
Does it work that way, and then does it end when the drought emergency gets withdrawn, or is it just 270 days and then we could do it another 270 days?
That's more or less correct, Madam Chair. So what would happen is at the end of the 270-day period, if the board desired to renew the regulations, it would have to take an affirmative action to do so. And upon doing so, it could continue to do so until either another 270 days has elapsed and then renew again, and then that could continue until the end of the drought emergency.
Okay.
So as I mentioned, these are temporary. There are health and safety and permit exemptions that apply. Also, these only apply to potable water, and you'll see in the change sheet that we've prepared, we've really codified that. However, these prohibitions, these 4 bullets, these types of uses would apply statewide to everyone in the state. Next slide. So in addition to those general use prohibitions,
I'm sorry, do you mind if I interrupt you to ask questions as we go?
No, go ahead.
I just had a question. I wasn't sure if it applies to everyone in the state. I'm assuming that includes a business. It's not just residential. How about public facilities?
Yes.
Okay, so it applies to everyone.
Yes.
Okay.
So these are the proposed requirements for the urban water suppliers in the state. And again, these are the proposed requirements for the 440 suppliers that have over 3,000 service connections. And to be clear, what we're proposing here will vary in its implementation, because what we're proposing is that they implement their water shortage contingency plans, which they are statutorily mandated to produce. But what's in those plans differs. And what we're asking for is for them to implement their plans, if they haven't already, at the level where mandatory outdoor use restrictions kick in. And so along with those mandatory outdoor use restrictions, there may be other restrictions in some suppliers' plans, and there may be different restrictions in others. So the effect will be varied. There are 49 water suppliers that have been identified by the Department of Water Resources as either not having one of these plans or having a plan that is inadequate. For those 49, you can see the second bullet is what we're proposing, that they do one of two things. They either limit outdoor irrigation to no more than 2 days per week, or that they implement other mandatory conservation measures to achieve a comparable reduction in water production relative to 2013. So they've got that option. And those 49, I should mention, serve about 1.5 million people. Next slide.
So those 49 are 1.5 million people compared to how many other urban Californians?
Well, they're a little over 38 million people in the state.
California, right. Not all are urban, but yeah,
Right.
most are. Okay, thank you. That,
Oh,
of course, is helpful to know.
Do you have
Max, just another way to put the 49 in context, so is that of the suppliers that are over 3,000 connected?
Yes,
So
that's
it's
correct.
basically 49 of about 440.
Of 440.
That should have these by the Urban Water Management Plan statute.
Right, so what we've calculated is there are 391 urban water suppliers that have these plans, and for those that already haven't implemented a mandatory level of restrictions, they will go to mandatory levels of restrictions, and these 49 will have to do one of the other two options.
So it's about 1 in 10, or a little more than that.
That's correct.
Do you have a list of the 49?
Yes, we do, and it is available.
Okay, thanks. I know we'll be talking about this because we got some thoughtful comments on it later, but I'll wait.
So for the smaller water systems, and again, these are under 3,000 service connections, what we're proposing is, and they, under statute, are not required to have these water shortage contingency plans. So what we're proposing for them is to limit outdoor irrigation to no more than 2 days per week, or, again, to implement something that is comparable and mandatory. Now, we realize that use restrictions may be new to some small suppliers, but we want everyone to conserve. This drought affects the entire state, and we think this is an achievable mandate. Also, I want to emphasize here that there is no percent production goal that we are looking to achieve here. This is not, we're not going for, 20%, and if we don't meet it, there'll be other consequences type of,
It's a participation.
that's right.
Yeah, one thing, Max, I think it might be worth just pointing out the origin of the suggestion for limiting to 2 days per week, for the audience and the folks on the web.
So we had a number of conversations with water supplier agencies, with water suppliers, with other stakeholders as we were developing these proposals and when we were developing the survey. And basically what we've tried to do here is find something that's workable, that can be implemented, that can be enforced, that can be easily achieved. And so, again, the 2 days per week is one option, but we have left open the option of other comparable mandatory measures that achieve the same types of reductions.
And Board Member Moore, you may be alluding to the fact that in his second executive order on the drought, the governor called upon all Californians to limit outdoor irrigation to no more than 2 days per week.
Thank you.
Next slide. So I'm going to turn it over to Carlos to talk about the enforcement tools.
Thank you, Max. So we did receive a number of comments from the public inquiring about the nature of the enforcement tools for these proposed regulations. I wanted to offer some clear elucidation, hopefully, of the enforcement tools available, and also emphasize some key points. So first
Yeah,
is,
there've been some confusion on this, so thanks.
please,
Carlos.
and should
Okay.
the members of the board have any questions, don't hesitate to interrupt. First is to the individual prohibitions. That's what Max covered in his first slide on the substance of the regulations. The intent with the regulations is that those individual prohibitions would be enforced at the local level, and the enforcement mechanism for local agencies would be an infraction, punishable by a fine of up to $500 per day. An infraction, as many people are familiar with them, is akin to a traffic ticket. It is, technically speaking, a criminal penalty, but one for which the maximum fine is set forth at $500 per day. And should one seek judicial review or some sort of hearing upon the infraction, that's before the Superior Court. A city attorney or a district attorney in a local jurisdiction, depending upon the circumstance, would be the one to represent the state, and the ultimate decision on whether or not a fine is assessed and in what amount would be made by the Superior Court. There are 2 points worth emphasizing on this. The first is that the $500 per day is a ceiling, not a floor. A court could, within its discretion, impose a much smaller fine or no fine at all for violating the regulations. Second, this is but one tool in the toolbox that local agencies would have. This doesn't in any way infringe, limit, or touch upon local agencies' abilities to use the tools that they already have through their conservation ordinances, through their conservation plans, to encourage, promote, or mandate specific behavior from their customers.
So this just adds a tool.
That's
to the
exactly
toolkit.
right. As to the actions that the proposed regulations would direct water suppliers to take, there the expectation would be that the board would enforce for a potential violation. And there we'd have 4 tools. The first, of course, is the same infraction. For many reasons, that's not often practical to do against an agency, but it is nonetheless available to the board. The second is, and actually the remaining 3 mechanisms for enforcement are all things that I think the members of the board are familiar with. The first is the imposition of civil liability. The new amendments to Section 1845 of the Water Code allow civil liability to be imposed in the first instance administratively by the board for violation of emergency regulations adopted pursuant to Section 1058.5, which these would be. And that would be a maximum of $500 per day. Another tool at the board's disposal would be to issue a cease and desist order. Once that cease and desist order becomes final, which happens after notice and opportunity for hearing, as the members are well aware, violation of that cease and desist order would trigger liability of up to $10,000 per day. Again, as to both of those amounts of civil liability, those are ceilings, not floors. The board could impose far less civil liability, it could impose no civil liability. But those would be the daily statutory maximums that the board could impose. And then finally, another option would be to direct the Attorney General to seek an injunction in Superior Court. That would have the effect of a court order telling a supplier to do something or not do something in compliance with our regulations.
You know, on the issue of discretion, and we've talked about this during briefings, but, you know, the Water Board has an enforcement policy, and could you speak just generally to that, that maybe that's a way for more transparency and accountability on our end to communicate the basis of an enforcement penalty?
Absolutely. At present, the board has an enforcement penalty that is mainly used in water quality enforcement actions. Of course, because these regulations have not yet been adopted, that policy doesn't take into account potential violations of these regulations. But nonetheless, that's certainly an action that the board could consider. And of course, as to any individual enforcement action, the board is required by law to set forth the basis for which it has imposed civil liability and to consider all relevant circumstances in doing so. So in each particular circumstance, the board would be endowed with considerable discretion, but it would be required to set forth in plain language, taking into account all the statutory factors, why and for what reasons it has chosen to impose civil liability upon violators.
Okay,
Good, thanks.
moving on. So the other component of these proposed regulations is mandatory provision of water production data. And this would apply only to the urban water suppliers, those with over 3,000 service connections. And what we are asking for is the amount of potable water produced along with a calculation of gallons per capita per day. And as I mentioned earlier, we're going to compare the 2013 data going for, or the 2014 data going forward, excuse me, to 2013 data as the basis for tracking progress based on the feedback we've received. And again, there's no percent reduction target we're aiming for here. Now, with regards to gallons per capita per day, we realize that there are concerns with the accuracy and there are challenges with producing a good number there. Nevertheless, we think it provides useful information to help us evaluate progress. And for now, we're just asking for production data because it's immediately available. In the future, depending on conditions on the ground, we may propose asking for sales data as well. Sales data would allow us to evaluate things like leaks, water that is not accounted for in the production numbers. Next slide.
Before you leave
Yeah.
that, and I know we have a number of comments on this, and it feels to me like we're in a situation where the perfect could be the enemy of the good. And it may be that people should just give us their best guess with all their caveats versus what happened in the voluntary thing where people didn't like what we asked, so they didn't answer the question, which, as you'll recall, I wasn't really happy with. But there's nothing that says when you ask for information that someone can't give you more information or explanation when they give it to you. So we'll see if we get some input that we can integrate into this. But again, waiting until we have the perfect numbers doesn't take into account the fact that we're in an emergency situation here.
Certainly, and as you mentioned, we've received a number of comment letters on
They're
this issue, so I'm sure we'll be hearing
Yeah.
about it.
I'm looking forward to that.
And I assume, you may be dealing with this later, but the difference between wholesale and retail, because we don't want to double count.
Right.
Yes, we are getting there.
Okay.
So based on some of the early feedback we got, there were some issues that got brought up for implementation. And so there are a few that are listed on this slide and the next. With regard to health and safety exemption in particular, one of the things that came up was, well, is this going to prevent some cities from washing down the streets? And I think it's pretty clear, and we've made it clear, and you have, Chair Marcus, in the press, if you're washing human waste off the street, that is clearly a health and safety need. So that's just not something that we're intending to prohibit as part of these regulations. Now, we've also heard from a number of interests about power washing, primarily of windows, using high pressure spray to wash office windows and other windows. That is something that would likely need to cease under these regulations. So I'm sure we'll be hearing about that more today, but I wanted to flag it because we've heard about it.
Yeah, and
heard that
we
one.
definitely read that in the comments and look forward to hearing more about it, because there's some nuances here. I think, sometimes use of water on hard surfaces for preparation for construction may be necessary, for instance. I don't know if I even read that, but I know from my experience. So, let's talk more about, when we wash hard surfaces, what are we talking about? Thanks.
Certainly. With regard to activating the mandatory provisions of these water shortage contingency plans, just a couple of things to note. As mentioned, the entities that are regulated by the Public Utilities Commission will have to go to them to formalize implementation of this plan. And that last bullet, there's a lot of concern out there that these water suppliers may not be able to pull their boards or their councils, their governing bodies together in time to notice this and have it in place by the August 1st implementation date that we anticipate for the regs to go into effect. So these are things that have been brought up.
Are those things we can just deal with in terms of our discretion if they're working on it? It's not as if we're going to go out and enforce on August 1st and be ubiquitous, right?
Certainly not. We do want to emphasize this is an emergency,
Urgent, yeah.
and
Right.
there's urgency, and we want people to act with all possible speed.
Well, and they have options at the local level as well to pull together emergency meetings. I was going to ask about CPUC, if you've had discussions with them about expediting these requests.
Yeah, we have been in contact with the staff at the CPUC, and they would anticipate that basically following the board's adoption, should the board adopt these regulations today, that their water suppliers would then immediately file these basically implementation letters with the commission to move that process along. Next slide. So we received over 100 written comments yesterday at noon on these proposed regulations. And a couple of the issues that were raised in numerous comment letters are listed here. Concern that these regulations not apply to water that is used exclusively for agriculture, and a number of suppliers whose conditions or whose actions have already generated substantial conservation, wondering if they can get extra credit, essentially,
Or a substitution.
or a substitution.
Right. That seemed reasonable.
And we can go over these and some of the others after the public comment when we discuss the resolution and the regulations. Next slide. Based on the feedback we've received so far, staff has proposed 3 clarifying changes to the regulations, and they're listed below. One is to make sure that people who need to wash solar panels to keep their efficiency up can do so. The second relates to wholesale water suppliers, which are suppliers that only sell water to other water suppliers that then sell water to end-use customers. They don't have the ability to impose outdoor use restrictions on those end-use customers because those are someone else's customers. They just sell the water to the retail agency. So we are making sure that the language reflects that. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we are proposing to change from a 2011 to 2013 reporting baseline just to 2013.
What about the planes, trains, and automobiles issue? Like, why just cars? That was an interesting comment we got.
That was an interesting comment, and I think it's worthy of discussion.
Okay.
So we have the proposed regulations themselves, and then we also have a proposed resolution that would accompany those regulations, which contains a lot of additional language about additional potential for conservation and things that everyone can do and should be doing, and a number of other items. So again, after the public comment, we can go through that resolution. And
Right, and we got some comments on what should be included in the resolution, which was interesting too.
right. So that concludes our presentation. Thank you.
All right. Questions or opening thoughts before we move into public comment?
Maybe just one thing, you mentioned in your presentation, Max, that this drought affects the whole state. And yet in some of the comments, we heard, hey, we've got plenty of storage. We're having a hard time locally, politically, trying to implement these shortage measures because if we look at our numbers, we don't have a shortage. And yet, with the truth of the drought is the ongoing inflows to that storage are really curtailed by nature. So do you have any response in mind, to those folks? Because you realize they have a political challenge to implement water shortage measures.
Sure. Well, you've probably seen the latest drought monitor map. It's got areas of dark orange, red, and dark red, crimson for different areas of the state that are in different stages of exceptional and extreme drought conditions, and it covers the entire state. One of the things that we're trying to do here, and we talk about this in the resolution, is really alert everyone to the fact that this drought could go on. It could be dry next year. It could be dry the year after. And one of the things that people need to be aware of is that potential and the fact that conserving water starting now, even if local supplies are in relatively good shape, is critical should we experience a continuing drought. Chair Marcus has mentioned before that the Australians, when they faced their decade-long drought, one of the key lessons they took away was we really should have started emphasizing the water conservation earlier on. We would have been in better shape if we had gotten the water use down in the early years. So I think that's really where we're coming from.
I appreciate that discussion. All right, I look forward to the comments.
I have just one comment, and that is I just want to thank the staff for working so hard and so fast. All of you are out there, and I'm looking forward to hearing your comments. But it is amazing the work that has gone on here. It's really almost superhuman. So I just want to make sure we know that all the work that you've put into this. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. I'm looking forward to the discussion. I think one of the issues that has come up a lot during the course of this drought is the fact that not everyone in California realizes how bad this drought is. And anecdotally, but as well as some of the responses we got, or didn't get, but responses we got to the survey, really demonstrated that folks just didn't get how bad this is and how bad it could be, apropos of what was just said. I mean, there has been a misapprehension that El Nino will save us, a lot of stories about El Nino, and yet not a lot of stories with a correction that it's likely to be a mild El Nino and that an El Nino could be dry or wet. And anecdotally, we hear from all sorts of folks that people don't really understand the gravity of the drought, particularly in urban California in places where people are hundreds of miles from their water source, and they're not seeing fields going fallow. And as you heard earlier today, they're not seeing the fact that there are communities on the verge of running out of water all over the state, more all the time. There are people bathing out of buckets. There are folks that are getting water trucks delivered to them through the Office of Emergency Services. And as a state, we can't afford to let more and more areas get into that situation if it doesn't rain this fall, and heaven forbid if it doesn't rain the fall after that. And the Australians had good advice for us, even our, I was going to say forebears, but we're not related to them, other than by sitting. But our predecessors here, in looking at the 77 drought, said they wished the key lesson was acting earlier and acting in terms of conservation. And we know that there are going to be thousands out of work. We know hundreds of thousands of acres of good agricultural fields are going to be fallowed. Fish and wildlife, which are endangered and lack resilience now, are struggling to survive. So it all points to the need to consider these proposed regulations, which are relatively modest. We have gotten quite a few comments from folks that this isn't strong enough, but we're hoping, I think, in the proposal, and we'll see how we end up through the day, that it at least sends a message as to the bare minimum that everyone should do. And I certainly am a believer in calling on the better angels of people's nature, having seen people step up during previous droughts when they realized there was a drought, that folks will do more, but we are really in desperate times. So I also appreciate all the hard work and thoughtfulness that the staff has put into this proposal. There are any number of ways, and I also appreciate the very thoughtful comments, as well as the concise yet thoughtful comments. It's a good model that so many people gave, but I do think this is the prudent thing to do, and if it rains, it will still have been a good exercise, and we'll all be so happy it rained that we won't mind if anyone's angry at us. So let's see where we get today. Let's move into the public comment. Or should I take a 15-minute break now? I can see you're tired. 15-minute break, and then we'll go into the public comment. We'll start at 11:15.
Hi.
Yes. News.
Oh,
Colleague
wow.
Paul Rogers.
Oh my gosh.
And he says live. Quick question, because I haven't done this before. Is there the likelihood it could go to the actual decision?
It's probably in your Dropbox.
Probably not. Here's what's nice, like, if it doesn't happen today, it will be because we.
If you send it to Deb, then it will be.
I sent it. It's worth staff going back and updating it, and we'd renotice. And we'd have to come back in 2 weeks. We wouldn't just be doing it tomorrow. I'm hoping that we'll do something today, and then we can always come back with further refinement. So, but there's going to be a thought process that we're going to have to go through together over the course
Good,
of
so
the
I'll
day.
let them know. It may happen today, but if there's a lot you need to think about.
It could be bounced
Yes.
to
Bounced in 2 weeks.
2 weeks.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Alicia, can you check your Dropbox to see if the change sheet is in your Dropbox?
My Dropbox always confuses me, but let's see.
Go ahead.
I have it in my email.
Okay, well, that's the same, as long as you can read. I have a hard copy, it's just that I kind of formatted for the way that it should be seen for you, so you guys know it's the change sheet. This is the one that brought us in the meeting.
Where would I see it in the Dropbox?
Ask Tam, because I don't know how to work Dropbox.
Item 5.
I'm in a different Dropbox.
I know, but she doesn't know how to see it in a Dropbox. You know how.
I only have stuff from
Dropbox
3 days
works.
ago in my. What item number are we?
We're in at 10.
Change sheet, yeah.
Okay, good, you're in that. Thank you. Whenever she decides to break for lunch. I don't care, as long as they're moved.
So, just for the ease of stuff, when we do the Zoom vote, we'll have you come out, stand by your name, and then they'll just be happening present, and they'll all just want to respond.
Do you think many of them will stay till we're done? Because it's hard to know.
You know what?
What we're
You
gonna
got
do.
it. We can run it. I mean, they've got the video, they've got all this stuff. They know, I told OT we're going to do that. David wants to do a light shot, and he's hoping if you do break it afternoon, so David, in case he wants you to do it at 12:15 or 12:20. Maybe that would be a 2-hour block. I mean, it seems reasonable to go for 2 hours. They want this gentleman from Channel 7. Okay. Do you want 21st date? I need to make sure it's this guy. I've been forwarding the staff presentation for
Okay. Maryland. No, I don't want to. I want us to move through it. I'll give you 5 as well. You're so sweet. I did see them though. I was wondering. Yeah, I wish they were the ones I lost. That's what they look like. It's so sad. I lost 2 really expensive pairs within 6 months, and so I got these which were crazy expensive, and then I don't really love them. So I got some of them. Yeah, they're but I got some electric blue ones by the same maker and like this maker and another pair. But I got this really cool pair that were like black and pink. Like Jedi, but in a really funky way with scroll. And maybe they're considered. So I did feel like this is like the era of me trying to figure out how to get
Okay, Tom, how are you?
Okay. So you're keeping up your diet and exercise regime?
Protein bars?
Protein bars? Are you riding your bike?
Treadmill, and then swimming, and then
I
working out with the
recommend,
weights.
I recommend those classes, actually.
Those classes.
Oh, you know, the boot camp and...
I don't do well in the group environment.
Oh, yeah, but you'd be surprised. I didn't think I did either. I would have never, I started going to those classes about 3 or 4 months ago. And of course, it's all young women, and then there's me. I'm maybe twice as old.
I did a
as
couple
them.
of Tai Chi and yoga classes.
Are you in class? In class?
Oh, boot camp and
You just had to
total
talk me
body
into it.
toning and muscle works and shadow boxing and...
Where is this?
And ripped. Ripped is one of my favorites.
Where's that? I don't even know what that is.
It's R-I-P-P-E-D. It's some new, it's got each word to mean something. The D is for diet, the E is for endurance, P is for power. They run you through this hour long.
And is it your gym?
Yeah. I've been going like 5 days a week for these classes.
That's great.
Plus doing my stairs, of course. But I only started like 3 months ago. But,
Still, that's great.
oh yeah, I mean, you get that pounding music and all those young women all bouncing around so energetically, you're kind of stuck going, trying to keep up.
That's great. That is fun.
But it's a better workout when you just do it yourself. It's easy to sort of slow down.
What time are we resuming? I forgot.
I think she said 15 minutes, so it's about 20 till or so. But it was almost 10:30 when we stopped.
How many Colorado's again? How you been?
So, this was good.
I don't think we've met. I've seen you on television.
We'll see how I think it's what?
It'll go smoothly.
I think so too.
deciding? At 25 and 26.
I can't see any major hiccups. I do think the follow-up after the emergency rate, sort of the more systemic changes that need to happen are going to be the challenge. And their financial challenges and their political challenges.
Yes, the follow-up is always the challenge.
But this is
No, I mean, that's actually a
So,
good question.
have you lost weight?
This morning I finally hit my goal that I've been shooting for a year. 170 pounds on the nose. First time.
Oh, that's
I was
fast.
190.
You don't even look like it. That's amazing.
Well, I lost 20 pounds.
Yeah.
I just did it very slowly.
Yeah. Well, that's
There are some communities where.
Well, I'm actually now increasing my calorie studies
We might go and do some
because I'm not supposed to lose any more weight.
right, exactly.
So now I'm like eating more like every day.
Yeah, I
But
got
I'm
it.
still shrinking.
Well,
Well, it's all the
I think it's the
exercise. too.
exercising.
Yeah.
yeah. It'll.
So my weight has stayed the same for the last month, but I've gone down another level.
It's a very complicated mix.
Yeah, I have to
Right.
avoid continuing to
Which
lose
is, I
weight.
can't wear suits anymore.
Well,
I have nothing that fits.
Whatever it is.
I've taken all my pants to the tailor to have them taken in and
that's optimistic.
Yeah.
well, you think I'll beat it back?
And we would focus on.
My problem's
this
gonna be
is
trying to-
statistically, yes.
Yeah.
This
I changed too
statistically,
much over
in
the
five
years.
years, you'll be back to where you were. That's
Place where nothing was
statistically.
happening or something really beautiful.
Well,
But I
maybe
know
I'll be
you're
too old
special.
then.
I
to
know
be
you're
bouncing
special.
around.
The way you classically do enforcement in a way. We'll wait and see. I mean, I am counting on better.
You just turn on. Yeah, she must have just turned it off.
to stay for the whole thing?
Depends if I get called first. If I can get a flight early, my flight right now is 7:30, so if I can get an earlier flight,
I've got to see, I got an early flight. Sandra wants to stay. I think maybe I'll just go too. I got a 3:30, so I have to leave at 2.
you're so focused. I don't know what's going on. Good, no.
Good morning. Courtney? Courtney? Can you turn on? All right. All right, we'll reconvene. Sorry to be a little bit late. I've got my board members back. The world is in harmony. Oh, and Janine? Oh, I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt. Is Max's presentation posted? If we could post it as early today as possible, because it's going to be a good summary for the news media. That would be helpful. It answered some questions that folks have had. All right. All right, we have quite a few speaker cards, and I think we'll go at least till 12:15 or so before we break for lunch. We'll see where we're at, eager to get through. I'm going to, there we go. People probably all went out and hoarded snacks, knowing that I usually go till 1. I'm trying to be kind here. Also, I want enough time for us to really think about everything we've heard. Some folks have asked for varying amounts of time. Some have asked for 1, which I appreciate, or 2. Again, a concise group, and I'm really impressed with that. Occasionally, folks have asked for more. I'm going to ask that people keep it to 3 minutes. Generally, our experience has been that you can make your main points, and the clock gets stopped when we're asking questions. And so, please, you can pique our curiosity and and we'll be able to have a bit of a conversation. But I think as a whole, everybody getting through all the comments and then being able to have a discussion will yield the best results. So our first speaker is Bob Anderson, Mr. Anderson from Weather Smart Tech. Where are you? There you are. I love saying Mr. Anderson.
Good morning. My name's Bob Anderson, and I'm a person just here on my own. I was prompted to come by the article in the LA Times that said, gee whiz, we don't really have a drought. We have a communication issue, and our ability to communicate with our citizens is key. We put out mandates, but we don't ask people. We take and turn around and we put out grants, but we don't look around to see if technology has produced the best products or what products are available. We don't talk to each other. We have water districts that we request information of, and they choose to say, I'm a little too busy today. My only comment to you is this: communication with us, with our districts, with our citizens is key. And if we don't take and include them in the process, especially the citizens, okay, we ain't ever going to get anywhere. I thank you for your time, and I trust you'll have a great day.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. Next we have Jennifer Aries from Yucaipa Valley Water District.
Lower this. Good morning, Chair, members of the board. Jennifer Ayers, Yucaipa Valley Water District, Southern California, for those of you who might not know where it is. As you know, on March 1st, the governor signed SB 104 in order to adopt the emergency regulations. The promotion of water recycling was one of those regulations. So Yucaipa Valley Water District is respectfully request, as stated in our comment letter, that recycled water reporting be included in the monthly reporting to the state and reflected in section 10.2 of the mandatory actions by water suppliers. Yucaipa Valley Water District has made extensive investments toward the implementation of recycled water. Currently, recycled